My presentation is shaped by a number of factors. Which include that this audience has researchers, policymakers, entrepreneurs, business managers, all with different perspectives and strengths of experiences. And I didn't know until now that we also have high school students, so I want to particularly welcome the high school students. I rarely talk to high school students, so I'm very happy that since part of my presentation focused on human capacity building, that's a good time to start. The discussion is focused on some of my discussions with Indira and the goals for the center and the forum. And I can only speak from my experiences, which are on some broad development issues, on innovation and work at the firm level competitiveness. Finally, we are at the Caribbean Forum, and I have a hard limit of 20 minutes, and I should actually try to be quicker than that, given that we are running late. And I hope we'll have good discussions after that. So what I heard and what I had assumed is that the ideas of inclusive and sustainable growth are really what is driving this. So competitiveness sometimes can be looked at very narrowly. So I want to set forward this larger goal, which is why we are interested in competitiveness. We are not interested only that an individual firm does well. We are interested that by doing well, it is contributing to the value added, to the welfare, employment, and welfare of the Caribbean people. So what will I talk about? Many of the things that I have talked about have already been stated by the eminent speakers before me. So I could have the pleasant duty of stopping here and giving you more time for doing other things. But I'll just run through this quickly and highlight during my talk some of my experiences on some of these issues. The slides will be available to you, so I won't spend a lot of time going through each slide. Essentially, I start with that we have macro. Many people talked about the macro issues that confront the Caribbean. These are the big issues: government policy, fiscal, monetary, trade. And the biggest macro issue in economics is economic growth. What makes the economy grow? What makes it grow faster or slower? What policies support higher growth? And in fact, when I went back to India after my studies in Berkeley, that was the question that sort of drove my first research interest into technology and innovation. Why was India's per capita income low? And what is India's contribution to innovation? Does innovation have a role in economic growth? Those were the questions that started my work 30 years ago. Anyway, growth is important. As the Commission on Growth noted, economic growth is essential for long-term poverty reduction and improving living conditions. This is a change in emphasis that earlier we thought redistribution was the only thing. Redistribution is important. We have right now a major elections in the United States. There's a debate between redistribution versus different kinds of growth. So we want certain amount of growth is absolutely necessary. And that growth should be such that we can do other socially, environmentally desirable activities to improve people's welfare. The micro deals with people, organizations, and firms, how they behave, what amounts they produce. And when we talk about firms, that's of concern to business students. And ideally, we just aggregate what people and firms do, and we go from the micro to the macro. Unfortunately, that has not been possible because this aggregation simply doesn't work when we go from the very small to the very large. We have similar cases in physics where we talk about microparticles and their characteristics, but when we go to the macro phenomenon, they don't quite behave. We don't just go from those characteristics to the macro. And as the complexity of these interactions have increased, and they are increasing, it is more difficult to link the issues between micro and macro. So what does that, how do we resolve it? How do we get a better understanding if this has become more complex? Complexities, as you know, have increased from globalization of trade, financial flows, technology, knowledge, and I want to emphasize new ideas, network effects, and new understanding of the ecology of economic activities, or the ecology of business firms, ecology of activities. Value chains, firm level competitiveness is conditioned by these kinds of factors. Some of the macro issues are largely conditioned by the external environment, especially for small countries, and they are a given. But critical development policies need to be built more firmly from the micro level observations and understanding of these constraints and options for actors and policies. My vision is that, especially in the Caribbean, the policies need to be based on greater and explicit emphasis on individual and enterprise level capacity building, learning, all of which results in gains in firm level and regional level competitiveness with increased value added. These all need to go together. That is my core position and statement. So I have some hopefully pretty pictures which I will run through very quickly. I see I've already gone 7 minutes and I'm trying to be within my 20. So the traditional views were that natural resources, capital, and labor were the most important ingredients for economic growth. The new emphasis is on human capacity, knowledge, innovation, which leads to competitiveness and growth. It's not that the traditional is not irrelevant. Certainly the fact that Trinidad is blessed with oil is a very useful component of Trinidad's much higher GDP and per capita income than some other countries. But the new is most relevant for the Caribbean and the small economies because new gives these opportunities for increased welfare and increased value added. This is a long, complicated diagram, or the simplest one about innovation systems and competitiveness. It has arrows. The framework conditions are what is given, what is under government policy. There are demands, supplies. There are different actors in that. And I've just not put all the arrows just not to confuse it further. But I just want to emphasize two types of innovations. One increases efficiency, and the second increases the production frontier. And I believe by focusing on these two kinds of innovation, we can tie a number of different threads together. This is one of my biggest points that I want to make, is that many studies and many of my observations at the micro level, at organizational level, and so on, is that we are normally, I don't know if I can point, but we are normally in a space which is called normal and is green, which is way below the production efficiency frontier. So in much of my work, and much of the work of other people that we have seen recently, moving the efficiency levels from where one is to higher levels within the production frontier is one kind of innovation, and they are relatively simple to achieve, relatively. And by relatively, I only mean that if you say we want to produce the next competitor to the iPad, that is much more difficult than achieving improvements in this. The second one is changing the frontier by finding new opportunities. And small new opportunities which are important for a space such as the Caribbean are also not difficult. So if they're not too difficult, These are the two areas I want to focus on, and if they're not too difficult, how can we get there? Now, before getting there, we have to look at the Caribbean context. Growth rate has been not bad. As I said, I came back to Trinidad about 17 years after my previous visit. And if I just look at the roads, the airport, the lovely hotel I'm in, which didn't exist before, I can say so far in 12 hours, very impressive changes have taken place. If I talk about the points that were made at the first session, very impressive changes have happened in what discussions are taking place on what is important for the Trinidad and the region. But the key things that will remain common is the lack of scale and therefore high overhead costs. That is not going to get changed very easily. The second one is natural disasters due to the location and climate change. A third feature is external shocks due to openness of the economy. We have to keep these three factors in our mind in plotting any kind of a course for the Caribbean. There is low growth, high unemployment, especially for youth and women, high debt ratios, high incidence of crime, and growing vulnerability to external shocks. So what we need is new and value-added activities, improved employment that will change the low employment and low standards of living. Remittances are important for some countries. Debt to GDP ratios are high in some countries. And we must leverage new sources of growth and what are the natural and locational advantages and build from the existing skills and economic activities. So there's the Caribbean in numbers. It's just as you know it. I won't dwell on it, excepting for the size issues. And if Haiti is considered part of the Caribbean, which normally it's not, we have the largest country is 10 million people. If we take it out, Jamaica at 2.7 million is the larger country, Trinidad at 1.3 million. But many of the countries are 100,000, 200,000, 300,000. So we had an innovation system. A lot of the talk of science and technology and what sometimes I heard from the previous session is how do I make a science and technology system in Trinidad? I think we have to keep in mind that the Caribbean and the global system, the Caribbean is at the bottom, and this is not to scale. If we put it to scale, the Caribbean would be a small dot, and the global system is huge. And my second country is Canada, and Canada is the smallest country in the G20, and in the Canadian debate, what can a small country like Canada do? And the total population of Canada is many times larger than all the Caribbean population put together. So the issue of smallness is not only for the Caribbean, it affects other countries as well. Now, where I want to end today is about triple helix and clusters, and the triple helix and clusters really, which was mentioned by the Vice Chancellor, they are one of the new ideas. When I talk about new, many of these ideas actually even Adam Smith noticed clustering of industry that was a few hundred years ago. And others talked about some of the things we are talking today, going back 100 years ago, 50 years ago. But this particular set of ideas about triple helix and clusters, they emerged about 20 years ago. Their practice is relatively recent, and their applications are relatively recent. And why I'm personally quite excited about these ideas is that they take some of the thoughts we had on innovation systems, on building science and technology, promoting innovation, promoting efficiency, cleaner production, cleaner technologies, and bring them together in a way that can be applied, and in a way that I believe that this Center for Competitiveness is already thinking about. And these pictures are that we have different parts of the economy, and they're often not working together. And this is true in big and small economies. And when people ask me what lesson can I give from India, one of the points about a place like India or China, simply because of the density of the population, that many of these chains simply exist without the government having to do anything. When we're talking about smaller scale, when we're talking about more backward regions, and even in India we can apply that, all I'm simply saying is not that India doesn't need it, but many of these things happen more automatically when your scale is very high and density is very large. Sorry. So, essentially what we are trying to get through a set of actions which is based on the triple helix and cluster model is a growth and an increasing interaction between these kinds of subsystems which are lying more disconnected in many economies. And I know I'm now at 17 minutes, so I'm going to keep running through. The slides are available, and I haven't yet talked about any personal experiences because I haven't had time. But if you run through this, each of these institutions, if they participate, there are different kinds of outcomes that are available to each institution to promote its agenda. And by coming together, one gets to learn. And the key point that some of our gurus have said is that knowledge is a combination of theoretical knowledge and practice. It is how do we get the practice into the theoretical knowledge, that is, these models help us to add that. So, creating that increased density of connections, overcome some of the small scale-ness of the Caribbean. They add value using positive features of the small scale, using the environment, location with the new technologies of ICTs, e-commerce, and so on. They increase the productivity and efficiency of firms, and more important, of the cluster and the value chain. They improve the kind of education and training, both formal and informal, through on-the-job training, linking education and the knowledge institutions with the workplace. They can challenge, one of the larger macro issues in some of the countries of the Caribbean is the whole migration of skilled people because of lack of local opportunities. This is kind of a double-edged sword, because if one of the dilemmas of a macro policy maker like the Minister of Finance is, why should I invest more in education if all the people will go away to Canada and North America? I think that is a wrong way of looking at it. There is an issue here that we can do something about, but we must focus on this little complication. So we have to try to convert the loss of human capital outflow to gains, connect knowledge to firms, firms to human capital formation, and the policy focus on solving problems. Innovation and competitiveness. I have come to the Caribbean also, my first time was 30 years ago. 30 years ago, some of the kind of ideas that were vogue were national productivity centers, national productivity councils, science and technology commissions, ministries. They haven't actually worked very well. I believe that it's not that they haven't, some of these ideas were not right. Some of the ideas were right, but some of the ways of implementing them were not right. And we have better tools now. And universities are a powerful vehicle for the development of these ideas. And most often, the links that we make improve the allocation mechanisms also for finance, which is one of the critical elements of industrial development and a critical bottleneck for firms. And again, taking an example, there's a recent study in India looking at the value of finance to a firm. And it ranges between when the private firm gets the capital, the rate of return for it ranges between 10% and 100 or more than 100%. But the problem is that certain kinds of firms, certain kinds of activities corner these 10% rates and not make it available to firms which could actually use it at 100% rates of return. So finance is absolutely critical. So cluster and value chains are one tool. They're not the only one. They're highly practice-oriented. We have to build on the theory of innovation and competitiveness, but we also must build with the practice in mind. There are similarities to medical practice where we have a model of the body, but we also keep trying different practices to improve the health, and that drives the current knowledge, not only the theory of what is the biology of the human body. And there's a whole list of good things that can emerge. So my final conclusion, and the one that I want to leave here, which is maybe controversial to some of the people and depends on their training, is that, and I said this once at 6-7 years ago in Washington at the World Bank, that the people who are trained with neoclassical theories believe that there is no free lunch, because there are lots of facts that don't fit the theory, therefore they are not relevant facts. We have to change our way of looking at facts. Facts are facts, so if our theory doesn't fit, if facts and theory don't fit, then the theory has to be changed. My key finding is that there are lots of free lunches, and this is an important point for some people in financial institutions, development agencies, finance ministries, who are trained that there are no free lunches because the market ensures a perfect equilibrium. We abound with free lunches, but we have to know that they exist. We have to put some effort to find out where is the free lunch being served. And we have to sometimes pick and choose. If there are many buffets where you can have free lunch, which one do you want out of that? Which one is right for you at that moment? And this is where the universities and knowledge have this wonderful property, is that they have lots of free lunches available. The question is, can you get to it? How do you know which of these free lunches is what you want and can use? So the sources of these free lunches are knowledge, connectivity, creativity, and capacity, leading to the two types of innovation that I mentioned. And these two types of innovations are totally within the Caribbean capacity. They're happening in the Caribbean. We heard in Jamaica about 3 professors who have created a new animal device which models human function. And the point I would simply say is that the chances that it would be patented and taken worldwide is very low. So that is not the direction to go. The direction to go is, how do we make better use of that kind of capacity to stay at the cutting edge? And finally, another point that came to me, we were talking a lot about the competitiveness indexes, measurements. We have to know which measurements are relevant for us. There's no point being carried away with all the measurements. I just would like to point out that taking an example from US, Harvard is a very selective institute, and getting into it has become very difficult. But important person at the university said, a person that we do not take, if we just took the first batch that we select and eliminate them and take the second batch, we would have as good a batch of students as what we do take. If we eliminate the second batch and take the third batch, they would be as good a batch of students as the first. So what I'm trying to say is, sometimes the numbers are so close together that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that you are maybe 73 if the difference between 73 and 23 is 1 point. Or it doesn't matter if that 1 point may be not the one that is most critical. That is where the new center and the work that it has begun on competitiveness in the Caribbean is most critical. And that is why I strongly endorse, and I'm delighted to be here. And I'm sorry I haven't said any of the stories that Indira wanted me to say. So I will end with one small story that I think is a takeaway on smallness. I was in a small island recently, and we were talking about economic development, value added, a lot of similar problems, same kind of issues. A lot of migration. If you develop skills, they migrate more. If you don't develop skills, you don't have the skills in the domestic economy. Whoever I met, the same person was the head of the Chamber of Commerce, head of the Small Industry Business Association, head of another institution, as I have met some people this morning over coffee. Now, we were looking at small things which can link into tourism and be value added with the economy. And I was talking to small NGOs, and one of them was trying to promote honey. And I said, well, I didn't know there was any honey here, so I didn't see anything in the data. He said, oh, that was because we had a lot of honey. It was very high value. It was organic. It was going to few countries, and so on. But given the size of the economy, there were 200-300 people who collected the honey, who had the hives, and one person who collected the honey around the island and then packaged it and sold it. He fell in love with an Australian woman, and he took all the money and he left. So that was 5 years before I was there. So until we find another person who steps into the picture to collect the honey and export it, we have a void in the market. Now, I believe it is quite important to keep some of these things in mind and not have goals and objectives which are completely outside the realm of feasibility. And again, that is why I strongly endorse the center and what they have begun. And I'm sorry I've taken 5 more minutes than I had hoped. Thank you.